Distinguished delegates and participants, I would like to thank the Independent Expert Mechanism for the invitation to be in dialogue with you all today. My specific intervention will highlight the use of technology by police forces in the United Kingdom against communities of African descent, racialized communities, and deprived communities. Amnesty International has found that 3/4 of UK police forces are using data-based and data-driven systems to attempt to predict, profile, and assess the risk of crime occurring in the future. The use of such approaches is influencing decisions in policing and the criminal legal system, as well as people's access to essential services. We have determined that the use of these so-called predictive policing tools in policing and the criminal legal system violates people's rights, including the right to a fair trial, the presumption of innocence, the right to privacy, the right to freedom of assembly and association, and the right to equality and non-discrimination. These systems operate as a modern method of racial profiling, reinforcing racism and discrimination in policing. They also crucially risk violations to people's economic, social, and cultural rights, such as the right to social security. Police forces use these systems to attempt to predict where crime will occur in the future, and to predict and profile who will commit crime in the future or who is at risk of committing crime or other criminalized behavior. Police then use these predictions, profiles, risk assessments to target specific areas and people and groups in those areas with increased policing. These predictions influence a wide range of policing, including surveillance, the monitoring of areas and individuals, police patrols, other targeted operations, including stop and search and arrest. These predictions, profiles, and risk assessments are often shared with other criminal legal system authorities, such as prosecution services, prison and probation services, as well as essential public service providers, such as councils and local authorities, and with the Department for Work and Pensions, as well as unspecified third parties. Predictive policing systems are contributing to racist and discriminatory policing and the criminalization of areas, groups, and individuals, perpetuating institutional racism in policing and society. Their use is leading to the repeated targeting of more deprived areas, which in the UK tends to include areas with higher populations of people of African descent, as well as other racialized communities. So the way these systems work is they operate using data from policing and the criminal legal system. However, that data often reflects the structural and institutional racism and discrimination already present in policing, such as in police intelligence reports, suspect data, stop and search data, arrest data. There is already inherent bias in that data. For example, areas with high populations of people of African descent and other racialized communities are repeatedly targeted by police and therefore already crop up in those same police records. Black and racialized people in the UK are also repeatedly targeted and therefore already overrepresented in police intelligence, stop and search, and other police records. This data is then used in these systems to develop, train, and operate them. These biases then lead to these same systems using that data to predict crime will occur in those very same areas, or that individuals from those backgrounds are likely to commit crime. These outputs then lead to the further repeated targeting of those areas and individuals, perpetuating a cycle of discrimination and criminalization. Amnesty International UK has determined that the use of these systems amounts to indiscriminate mass surveillance, which can never be a proportionate interference with the rights to privacy, expression, association, and peaceful assembly. We consider all indiscriminate mass surveillance fails to meet the test of necessity and proportionality, and therefore violates international human rights law. and we have called on states to take steps towards transparency and accountability and prohibit the use of these technologies. Thank you.
Can you please explain how the use of new technologies could lead to discriminatory and excessive policing and racial profiling? Are there any accountability mechanisms in UK to mitigate this risk?
Thank you very much for those questions. First, I'd just say, as the introduction so clearly set out, so many methods of policing claiming to be modern are in fact rooted in history. With respect to this technology, the idea of suspect communities or criminal communities is not new. This concept has its origins in containment strategies during colonialism, but it is increasingly being codified to a tech platform. With respect to the questions, I turn to the first on impact. The people in our research spoke of being repeatedly targeted and stopped by police in the areas where they live, of being targeted by police because of where they live, of being questioned, stopped and searched, being subjected to violence by the police. Others spoke about the trauma of being repeatedly targeted, both on an individual and a community level. I should also note we are not talking about small numbers of people being run through these systems. Some of the individual focus systems have had over 250,000 names run through them, and some of the geographic focus systems similarly expose large numbers of people in those areas to over-policing. As the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights has acknowledged, predictive tools carry an inherent risk of perpetuating or even enhancing discrimination, reflecting embedded historic, racial, and ethnic bias in the datasets used, such as the disproportionate focus of policing on certain minorities. So the geographic focus systems and hotspot mapping systems lead to those same areas and communities, often more deprived areas, areas with high populations of people of African descent and other racialized people, to being repeatedly targeted by police. This leads to a greater likelihood of engagement with police and therefore increased risk of encounters escalating into violence and sometimes serious harm. The individual focus prediction, profiling, and risk systems similarly lead to people from those same backgrounds being profiled and repeatedly targeted, therefore increasing their likelihood of engaging with the police. I highlight one case study from our report, a man who had been stopped and searched by police over 50 times. He discovered he was on one of those systems based on what he believes is incorrect data on his criminal record. Turning to the second question, there is significant lack of transparency around police use of these systems in the UK. People do not know about their use in policing, their influencing, the influence of these systems on the policing of the areas where they live, how they are affected or targeted. People are not informed or do not know if they have been targeted as a result of a prediction, a profile, or risk assessment. People do not know if they are on a system, how to challenge such a prediction, profile, or risk assessment. And when people do seek information, for example, about whether they have been profiled, they are met with legal refusals, rebuttals, and exemptions from the police. In response to the findings of our report, the minister who is responsible has stated that police forces can sign up to an AI, artificial intelligence covenant for policing, which states that police use of technology should be lawful, transparent, responsible, accountable. However, this covenant is not legally binding and not a satisfactory safeguard for the violations we documented. Amnesty International conducted research in the UK on these technologies for 2 years. During that time, police forces often did not reply to requests for information, or sometimes only replied when prompted by further requests. Some forces cited blanket exemption. 19 forces provided contradictory information on multiple occasions, stating they did not use predictive systems, when other sources or information in the public domain stated that they did. Transparency requirements in the UK relating to algorithmic systems are minimal, such as the government's algorithmic transparency standard, which states that public bodies should place records on a government website when they are using such technologies. However, this standard is not statutory or enforceable, and government bodies have no obligation to publish an algorithmic transparency record. Currently, there are just 2 records of UK police forces on the register there. So the above highlights the lack of meaningful movement on transparency and accountability in the UK, and Amnesty International UK has detailed a number of steps for the UK government to take in this regard, whilst we continue to call for a prohibition on this technology. Thank you.